The EU is strengthening its ties with partners around the world as tensions in transatlantic relations grow under the Trump presidency. Brussels has taken a major step in that direction by signing a free trade agreement with India. Deutsche Welle correspondent Chiponda Chimbelu joins us now from Berlin with more on the deal and how the EU is working to expand its relationships with other regions. Chiponda, g'day. So how significant is this EU-India free trade agreement?
Well, Joe, it is very significant, of course, and that is because the EU is India's biggest trading partner, and India is the bloc's 11th biggest trading partner. Now, this deal will lift trade restrictions for the 2 billion people living in both the European Union and India. And that is why the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen called this free trade agreement with India the mother of all deals. Now, this is, of course, in response to the current global environment with the US tariffs that we've seen, and of course, more export restrictions from China. Now, all of that has been bringing the EU and India closer. And this deal also goes beyond trade. Brussels and Delhi also announced a defense and security partnership on Tuesday, so there is more going on there. But of course, this deal still needs to be ratified, and it is, of course, not the only one that the EU has been working on.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how countries are building those relationships with countries other than the US, like Keir Starmer in China at the moment. Which other trade deals has the EU been working on?
Well, exactly, Joe. The European Union has also been working on a free trade agreement with Latin America, which is, of course, the Mercosur trade deal. And that was signed on January 17. And we've been covering it a lot in the news, of course. But that is another agreement that has unfortunately hit another roadblock. And that is because the European Parliament is yet to formally vote on the deal. Now, last week on Wednesday, EU legislators voted to send parts of that agreement to the European Court of Justice for a legal check. Now, while the free trade agreement with the Mercosur countries in Latin America does have support, there are still a lot of critics within Europe, especially from the farming community. And that is because many farmers do fear that Europe could be flooded with cheaper and less regulated agricultural products from Latin America. So while the EU is looking to deepen ties with other partners, Joe, getting those deals done isn't easy.
Right. And what can be expected as Brussels pushes to diversify its global partnerships?
Well, Joe, the European Union already has preferential trade agreements with 76 countries, and it is considering joining the so-called Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership. Now, that is, of course, a free trade bloc of a dozen Asia-Pacific countries and the UK. And a free trade agreement has been in negotiations also with Australia for years now. But of course, there have been some disagreements over concerns about agricultural products there as well. And that is, of course, because that is a sector that has been experiencing a lot of pressure here in Europe. And that is why we've also seen the opposition to the Mercosur deal with Latin America here in Europe. Now, of course, that didn't play much of a role in terms of the negotiations with India because that wasn't a concern that farmers here had, but we did see from India that there was concern over agriculture because agriculture is a major employer there. However, the fact that we saw that deal being signed after 20 years of negotiations, Joe, it does actually go to show that the old global trading order is gone and the realignment is happening with the EU pushing for more deeper partnerships with other regions and countries.
Yeah, that's another really good example of that. OK, Chiponda Chimbelu there in Berlin. US President Donald Trump plans to de-escalate the situation in Minneapolis after the shooting deaths of 2 US citizens by federal agents. Backlash against his immigration crackdown has intensified, with some Republicans joining